right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Robert Vargas. I am the host of the Godfident Man Podcast, and this is our inaugural episode. So I've got with me Alex, and Alex is one of the producers here at Podpopuli. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is their studio in Palm Beach Gardens. So Podpopuli is hosting this episode here. So we're happy to be here. And I wanted to share with the audience a little bit about why the Godfident Man Podcast. Why now? Where did it come from? What was the idea behind it? And I know Alex, will help me as best as he can. So I appreciate that, Alex.
What I'm here for.
Yes, thank you. So just to share with you a little bit about who I am. First of all, I'm a husband. Been married for 12 years. We actually originally came from San Diego, moved here to Florida, Palm Beach Gardens from Southern California. I was born in Peru, raised in Southern California. So I always say that I'm a city boy at heart, right? But I'm also a dad. I'm a father of three, and I've got a teenager in the house and two young boys. And so I'm in that stage, that season in life. And I know that for many guys, they find themselves in that season. Having a teenager in the house is not for the faint of heart. And today's world certainly comes with, its set of, challenges and seasons. So that's where I am. But I'm also a business professional. I've been in business for 20 years in the financial services industry. And, for me, doing this podcast it's really about a mission. And I've been blessed that over the course of many years, I've had people in my life, men in my life that have served as mentors. I've also been able to participate in certain things. I'm a John Maxwell certified coach and trainer, and I was part of that John Maxwell team. And being able to be around people and the energy and being able to be a practitioner in coaching and teaching has been a big part of my life. And, that's led me to doing this podcast in and of itself. Before that, I did a lot of public speaking as well. So I
could tell.
Yeah. So, I'm a trained speaker. Now, interestingly enough, I've never been part of a Toastmasters. I have always been curious about that, and it's certainly on my list of things that I'd want to do. But I've had the opportunity to work with youth, and that was a great experience. We did an entrepreneurial boot camp in San Diego where we had an opportunity to, to sponsor about 25 students. It was actually covered by NBC San Diego, and that's actually what led me to my first visit to Florida. And so that's actually where I met my wife too, and a story for another day. But here we are 12 years later, 3 children later. And, I've been part of large churches. I would say that, I grew up in a Baptist church, the Redeemer Baptist Church in Southgate, California, for those that may be listening from that area. But, for me, where I learned to serve, where I learned to really roll up my sleeves and help others and be others oriented was at the Rock Church. Okay. And the Rock Church was and is a church, as a matter of fact, that has been in San Diego. They used to meet on campus. I went to San Diego State University, and they used to meet on campus. Pastor Miles McPherson is the founding pastor. He's still there. But what was great about that experience for me is that's where I was involved in volunteer pastoral care and ministry. I led several Bible studies there and helped to initiate what would later become their Spanish ministry. So for me, that's where I really learned how to serve, and that was a big thing for me. I have great memories, great friendships from that church. And it was one of the places I missed the most when I moved here to Florida. But that also was formative in my desire to want to continue to do ministry.
Got it.
Yeah.
How long did you move to Florida? Have you only been here for a year, 2 years?
No, actually, I moved here 12 years ago.
Okay.
So 12 years ago, and
basically a native.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I'm still not used to summers here. I mean, I don't know how long you have to live before you can finally get used to the humidity. And when people ask me literally, hey, why would you move here? Right. And I tell them that, my wife's family is here. And so that's how we really came, because of family.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal for me.
Okay.
And I still remember that story like it was yesterday. I used to work for a large investment firm in San Diego, very national firm. And I was part of a partnership. And I remember my best friend, him and I, had been working in the business. And I was at a point where I had recently gotten married, less than 90 days into,
Wow.
as a dad and as a husband. And I realized that something had to change. I was very preoccupied with a lot of things at that time in my life. I was spearheading a ministry. I was leading this youth entrepreneurship boot camp, doing nonprofit work, and managing my business, managing my practice. And, how do you, that expression where you say, well, my plate is full.
Yes.
Well, I had a table full of plates, right? And so how do you make room? And now I'm married, and I became a husband and a father. My oldest was actually my stepdaughter. She was 2 at the time. And, I moved them from Florida.
Yeah.
So I'm doing all of this, and now I'm married and I'm a dad.
Yeah,
right?
You just keep filling up
and
plates,
you've got all this stuff happening, and it's different when you're volunteering. It's different when you're a part of something, but when you're spearheading or you're driving what's happening, whether it's business, nonprofit, and so forth, you really have to think about, strategically how to either prioritize or how to say no to certain things. And, for me, it was a difficult time. It was a very challenging time. It's one of the biggest challenges that I've faced in my adult life.
Got it.
Because I knew that I had to put my family first. My wife was I moved her to Florida, and now I'm not home. I'm, doing meetings. I've got my day job. I'm doing all this other extracurricular stuff. Yeah. And I get home late. I'm out doing projects during the weekends and things like that. And I didn't know how to really deal with that. And that was my first challenge as a married man, right? 90 days into it.
How did you overcome it?
Well, what's interesting is there was a desire for me to maybe transition into a different role with work. And now, because I was very much involved in the community, and I was doing a lot with other groups and nonprofits and organizations as an opportunity to network, but also have visibility in the community. Yeah. I didn't want to be too outspoken about what I was trying to do, because I didn't know what that transition would look like yet. Uh-huh. And I wouldn't want people to misunderstand, well, does that mean, you're leaving? What does that mean?
Yeah, you didn't want to scare them.
I didn't want to scare anybody. So that was a big concern. And what I was doing is I was trying to find, maybe I need to leave the area. Maybe we should move, further north in California. Maybe we should move to a different area, relocate, and maybe I should even change companies. But if I leave, then at the end of the day, people can't really try to make something work, because you're leaving for family, personal reasons. They can't really, they can't come against that, right?
Yeah.
So I still remember having a conversation with my best friend. He was my business partner at this firm. And he said the following words to me. He says, Robert, I can't do this business the same way without you, but you know what you have to do. And I still remember, like, we were standing in my kitchen at the time in my apartment in San Diego when he said that to me. And the second that he said that, I knew right then we need to move to Florida.
Oh, wow.
And see, my wife originally left San Diego. I met her on the way out. She was leaving San Diego, okay. And then I brought her back. Right? Back. Yeah, and funny enough is I did a soft proposal, saying, what do I have to do to bring you back, knowing that there's only one way to bring her back, yes. Right? But that's exactly when he said that, I knew that meant Florida. She had never brought that up. I mean, when we got married, it was just assumed. And she never said, hey, can we stay? Or no, she just said, okay, well, I've got to move back to Florida. back to San Diego. I mean, that's where you are. That's where your family is, where your business is, where everything that you're working on. And I just knew at that moment, I said, that's where her parents are. And right now we've got a 2-year-old daughter. I need to focus on my family. And I can't do that with all these other things happening. I literally need to uproot and I need to focus on what's most important.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big lessons for me, because I realized that if I couldn't do that in 90 days, how am I supposed to make the hard choices in life and marriage and family 9 years later?
Exactly.
If I couldn't do it right out of the gate, how could I do it much later in life when there's more at stake, a lot more built up? And that was, for me, it was the obvious choice. And I will say this, during the time, those 90 days that I tried to find other opportunities, every door would close. I was apparently overqualified for everything that I looked at.
I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe, and every door would close and I would say, God, I don't understand. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I would call out to him. And I remember, praying and asking, Lord, what am I supposed to do? And really seeking him in that area, during that time. And when my business partner said that, I knew it was like a light bulb went on. And I said, Florida, we should move to Florida. The very fact that he said that was it was like he was releasing me from our commitment in that partnership, saying, it's okay. I value you. And you are now a married man. He's a married guy with 5 kids. And so he understood.
It was your first kid. It was your wife.
Right.
You had to make that hard decision.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like we could wait to have children. We already have one. We wanted to continue to have kids.
I get it.
And so there was no time to waste, in a sense, right? I'm not getting any younger, neither is she. And so we made that decision, and we moved. Literally 90 days later, we moved. And I remember
talk about commitment, man.
Telling my father-in-law, I said, hey, we're moving back. He says, all of you? You're all moving back? Is everything okay? I said, yeah. Now, that in itself was the first time that I saw God move in a really, really big way. Yeah. Because as every door was closed, when we were in Southern California, my wife said, well, what are you going to do? I just signed a 7-year contract and I'm 2 years into it with my employer at the time. Now I'm going to dissolve a partnership. But for me, I knew that I was honoring God by honoring my family. And I was confident that by doing that, he was going to honor me. Okay. And by putting my trust in him, he was going to show me the way and he was going to open the doors. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, from us moving here, I literally took a 2-week time off and I moved the entire family. And we didn't have the next step. We didn't know if I was going to transfer. Oh. I didn't want to transfer because, number one, in my line of work, in the financial services industry, you have a book of business, and now in a partnership, sharing that revenue, it wasn't going to be enough.
I get it.
So I was trusting God, and I told my best friend, my business partner, I said, listen, we're going to dissolve the partnership, and I'm going to give you my half of the book.
Really?
So he doubled his book in one day, and we dissolved the partnership. And I still remember I had 3 interviews that very week. And I'm on a 2-week vacation. Yeah. He literally had my letter of resignation in his drawer just in case I left the company.
Oh, wow.
So he had my letter of resignation signed by me just in case. But my ideal position, which, was with the same company, but in a different role.
Okay.
The company had just launched a new sort of a startup a program or line of business within the investment firm that was only a year old. So they'd never had a recruit that came to the investment side that was now trying to move into a different side.
Usually vice versa.
Well, no, it's typically, once you're in that line of work, in wealth management, you're not able to, you don't go into a salaried position, you're building your book and that's how this works. So what ends up happening is when I'm here, I interview, and within the first 2 days we're here, I'm supposed to have an interview with the same company that I was already a part of, but in that new role. Yep. Well, they postponed the interview for the following week.
Oh, wow.
So now I'm going, great. That's the position I want, but I'm going to trust God. And then I interviewed with another major bank and another major investment firm, and they wanted to hire me on the spot.
Really?
Yeah. So I went from no opportunities available
Two right there
to two right off the bat. But the one I really wanted, which I felt was the best fit, postponed the interview for the following week, and I don't have a decision yet. And those first two offered me up an opportunity right off the bat. Wow. And so when that happened, I said, well, we're going to trust God. We had moved into our new place, and get this. Normally when you have a lease, you have to cancel the lease
and then charge
you have to
something.
pay.
Yeah.
It's not cheap. And then you've got to do a new deposit wherever you're going to move.
Exactly.
Well, I happened to find, again, the way that God just opened doors. It turns out that I was leasing from a national company, and that company owned properties in Boca and Palm Beach Gardens.
Got you.
And in both of those locations there were openings for the position that I wanted.
Yes.
So we only paid $50 to transfer my lease.
Wow.
That was it.
Okay.
Right. So that expense that most people would have to pay a ton for.
Yeah. They have giant headaches.
Yep. I didn't have to pay a security deposit, and I didn't have to cancel I paid $50 to transfer my lease.
That's awesome.
So I saw God show up in a big way, and now they have these two interviews, and I let them know I need some time to think about this. Give me at least a week. I finally get to that interview. We're now only days before I'm supposed to
give the other people.
They're expecting my return.
Yes.
And I had now, just to back up, I'd previously already spoken to my boss, let him know of my intent. And they knew I'd recently gotten married. And so they knew that my family was from Florida. I got married in Florida. Yeah. So what ends up happening is I do the interview finally. And they said, well, listen, Robert, we would love to have you. Just promise me you'll stay at least a year.
Okay.
That's what the regional manager said.
Yeah.
And I said, absolutely. Because remember, everyone else in Southern California thought I was overqualified.
I get it.
They realized the same thing, but they said at least stay a year, and it was within the same company, a different line of business. So it all worked out. But then he said, listen, I won't be able to start you for another month. All of our initial training classes are full.
Oh, it's like
and so I'd have to go a whole paycheck, no paycheck for like a month. And I'm like, I've got kids, I've got
it's like, I
all
have
these expenses, right? I'm just moved, the movers, the vehicles, and getting
we
settled,
need groceries,
right? So I'm like, oh my goodness, and I just gave up half of the book.
Yes,
right. So I'm going, okay, well, I said, well, there's no other class now. This is a Friday afternoon, and he said, no, the next class starts this Monday. It would take a miracle for me to put you in there. And when he said that, I said, then please try. And he said, you'll hear within 24 hours from us if we can. Otherwise, it's going to have to be next month.
Yeah.
I received an email that evening. So this was on a Thursday. I misspoke. A Thursday evening, I received an email Friday afternoon saying that they booked my flights and I'm leaving Saturday.
Really?
For training out of state.
Wow.
So I was on that training class that very Monday. So my buddy ripped up the resignation letter. My boss actually felt bad. He wanted to give me a going away party and so forth. And I never returned back to San Diego.
Oh, wow.
And so once the 2 weeks went, I started officially with the new line of business in the same company. So I didn't breach my contract.
Oh, okay. So
right, by doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that was, and I thanked the other two companies for the opportunity, but I decided not to pursue that.
Okay.
So that was how we got here.
Yes.
And it was a total God thing. Right. And my wife, the whole time, she remembers going, I didn't know how this was going to work. I was just watching you the whole time. Remember, we're newlyweds.
Yeah.
And I would just see that you were just so sure that God was going to come through. And my response to her was, well, because if I put you first, how would he not come through?
Exactly.
See, everything about San Diego, everything about me trying to find another opportunity was about me. Mm-hmm. Me trying to stay where I was comfortable, not and move as little as possible so that it wouldn't be a disruption for me. But when I said, God, what do you want me to do? And his word and what his purpose for me is, well, I've given you a helper. Your wife you are now a married man. So now you don't live for you alone. You also live for her and now your daughter.
Exactly.
Right. And so putting those things in the right perspective and in the right order, first me listening to him, and then out of obedience, acting on what he was showing me.
Okay.
And then every door would open after. And so that has been a big part of how the journey began here in Florida.
Got it.
And many more stories will we share on this podcast about the things that God has done. But it's when we take action, not just when we hear, but then what we do.
Exactly.
Right. And that's what this podcast is about.
Yeah. I was about to ask that. Is that what the podcast is about?
Yeah. So, part of it is encouragement. I mean, the reason I decided to do this is because, I've been to men's events, right? Of Promise Keepers, and I've been on retreats, and, even churches when they'll put on men's events. And a lot of times it's a very, I hate to say it, but it's a lot of, it's a production. It's a speaker who speaks in general terms to a group of men. It could be hundreds or thousands. And, at the end of the day, then they go back. They go back to where they came from. They go back to where they drove from, back to their churches. Was there connection? What are the next steps? And many times that's where a lot gets lost.
I get it.
And, this is something I'll talk about on the podcast as well at some point. But I'm wearing this wristband and it says transformed.men, right? Transformed, not conformed.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine and pastor, Steve Morris, he is a family pastor at a church in Palm City. Okay. And I've been attending the Transform retreats that he puts on, and he's got a heart for men of all walks of life.
I get it.
And it's a very simple, I love the simplicity of it. No big lights. It's not a big production. No, big speakers. It's teaching, it's prayer, it's worship, and it's time alone with God.
Yeah.
Rinse and repeat for a weekend. Okay. Time alone with God. I turn my cell phone off. I don't hear from anybody and nobody hears from me. And it's teaching, right from scripture, right from the word of God. It's worship, so we're praising God. We're seeking him. And it's been a beautiful thing. And when I say guys from all walks of life, guys that are brand new Christians, never heard of Christ, to guys that this is
they've been following Christ since they were born. Basically.
Right. Yeah. Guys that are alcoholics, guys that don't know how to quit, guys that if it wasn't Las Vegas to cheat on their wife, it was this retreat. So guys at the end of their rope, literally maybe tried to take their life, all walks of life. And when my friend invited me to this, he told me that. He says, hey, this is different from the things we've done. Yeah. It's not flash, it's not, this is warfare. There's guys that we need to come alongside and fight with. And there's spiritual darkness that we have to fight against. And then there is guys that are there that want to encourage and uplift and be part of that battle.
Love that.
And sometimes you're the everyday part of life and the weariness of work and responsibilities and commitments to get away and just be alone with God and spend that time and then be around other brothers that you can encourage, but they can also encourage you. That to me has been the most powerful experience and one of the most fulfilling. And that's, I want to, when I look at that, I know that there's guys that for every one guy that shows up that is on the verge of divorce, there's hundreds more.
Yes. Thousands
more. For every one that thought about taking his life, there's thousands more. Mm-hmm. But just that one guy, those 10 guys showed up, those 30 guys. And the group is growing, but we have a problem in our society. We've gotten to the point where, men are hiding, men are too embarrassed, men don't know when to speak up, right?
They're scared to ask for help.
They're scared.
I get that. Yeah.
And so, God has not given us a spirit of fear. Mm-hmm. And so, but what does that mean? Well, if you don't know God, how can you trust a God you don't know?
I get it.
Right? How can you have confidence in a God that you don't have a relationship with? And so these are important things but in that you discover maybe a lot about yourself, and it's like peeling an onion, right? So God will uncover things, and we want that. We want to be vulnerable and say, Lord, examine my heart.
Exactly.
Show me, right? A lot of times we kid ourselves and we try to hide our
true selves.
Yeah, our true selves, our inefficiencies, our deficiencies. But it's when those come to light that God can work, because God knows all those things already.
I get it. Yeah.
Right. And so it's that wanting to encourage men, provide them hope. And I know guys are struggling. Guys are struggling in family. I told you, teenagers, a tough age, right?
Yes, they are.
I'm right in it, and there's a lot of prayer. There's a lot of seeking, and so we'll have stories. We're going to have guests on this show,
Awesome.
That are experts in these areas, that have written about these things, and also we're going to bring that to our community, our audience. So if this is your first time hearing and listening about this podcast, please share it. And we'd love to hear your feedback, because we want to have times of prayer where we pray for you. And if you're going through something and we can provide advice on this program, then we want to be a part of that solution. But most importantly is pointing you to the solution, and that's Jesus Christ, right? So that's a little bit about why I began that, and
I kind of hit on your target audience too. Like it seems like you're going for younger men, basically, like young adults. Basically.
Yeah, young adults, men in their 40s, early 50s, right? That are in the thick of it. It's funny. They say that the 50s or mid 40s are the midlife crisis,
Yes.
right? You see, we get a lot of cues from culture. That's part of the problem, right? Yeah. Instead of getting our cues from our designer, our creator, right? When I look at a watch, it didn't just make itself.
Yeah.
The parts weren't scattered, and then someone made thought about what this watch would look like before one piece was ever established.
Exactly.
Well, as men, right, as human beings, we're the same way.
Exactly.
Right? We have a creator, a designer. If instead of taking our cues from what culture tells us, what society expects from us, why don't we seek the one who created us? Right? Everybody has a purpose. Most people give up on trying to seek it out, and most people live on default. Most people simply accept their life rather than seek it, design it, right? That's what John Maxwell always says, right? Many people just accept their life, but you don't want to live in default. You want to design it.
Exactly.
Don't just accept it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's the target audience. Really, I want to reach out to those men who, are dads. They're raising kids. They're balancing work. They're trying to get established, or they've reached a point in their career where they're wondering what's next. Yeah. Many of them maybe chase the wrong thing. You ever heard that experience where you climb the ladder, you get to the top and realize that
there's nobody there.
You climbed the wrong ladder. You were actually supposed to be climbing that one.
I've never heard that one before.
Yeah. So imagine you climb, you get to the top and you're going, oh, wait, it was that one.
Yeah.
Right. So you want to make sure that you're spending all this energy and focus. Is it worthwhile?
Yes.
And what's the reason behind it? So I know that's definitely widespread and prevalent with men today, young men, and I have a heart for wanting to encourage and help other people. That's that ministry part, right? That was established in me a long time ago, going back from, my roots at the Rock Church, where I learned to serve. Yeah. I learned what it meant to do something, and not just to be a participant, somebody warming a chair, listening to a Sunday message, but somebody that got up and did something with it. I'll say one thing, and as we kind of conclude our time, Pastor Miles always said something that stuck with me. He said, there's a reason why we have hundreds of ministry at our church. And he would say that when I was part of the church then, but he would say, because anytime someone would say, well, why don't you do this? How come you're not reaching out to that group? And what about people that are going through this? And he would always say, well, that's a great idea. Why don't you start that? Well, don't you have a heart for this? Oh yeah, we do. Do you have any experience? Well, yeah, but no, it doesn't exist. Why don't you start it?
Exactly.
And I love that he actually wrote a book called the Do Something Church, right? Okay. But it was the idea is that if there, it reminds me of a song that talks about, all these things we look at, like, God, don't you see that? Like, Lord, don't you see the poverty? Don't you see, racial division? Don't you see the tensions? Don't you see the hate? And God says, yeah, well, what are you going to do about it, God? I made you.
Exactly.
I made you and you see it. So God, give me your heart for what breaks yours and let me do something with it. And so for me, this is a labor of action, right? I know that a lot of times men just listen, they go to the service, they take, but God has called us for so much more. Exactly. And there's a bigger world than we think. And the enemy, right? We have a real enemy, and we'll talk about that on the podcast too. Who's our enemy? Who's our real enemy? Well, it ain't your wife, right?